A warm welcome to today's video on the problem of evil for philosophy A-Level. Now, this video I'm going to break down the nature of moral and natural evil, how those two can be distinguished between in the logical problem and the evidential problem. Then we're going to look at two defences that the spec needs you to know, the two defences that the spec needs you to know. But we're also going to look at one further one. In an essay, I generally would prefer writing three main body sort of paragraphs, in which case just knowing the responses from Plantinga and Hick aren't quite enough for my preference. And so I'm also going to talk to you a bit later about St. Augustine's Theodicy as well. But let's first talk about the distinction between natural and moral evil. Okay, so natural evil are instances of evil from the natural world, okay? From things that we don't really consider conscious, rational, free agents. The weather, the animal world, the animal kingdom. There is clear examples of like famine caused by drought that we would consider being in some sense evil and certainly leading to suffering, but there's no conscious mind, it seems, responsible. There's no real intention behind these things. It's just that there's evil consequences that arise from these phenomena, and that's natural evil. Moral evil are actions performed by conscious, rational, free agents, humans, right? And this can now split into both consequences and intentions. We think that although an outcome of something like a bomb plot, a bomb threat, may have led to evil consequences, but luckily it was found out about and deterred. But there were still evil intentions there. We would still call those evil. And so we can now, with moral evil, have evil intentions and evil consequences. That's the first important distinction that I need you to understand. The next important distinction that you need is understanding the logical problem and the evidential problem. Now, I've sort of divided this into two separate things, but I need you to understand the Epicurean paradox and Mackey's inconsistent triad are more or less the same thing. The Epicurean paradox is just that God either wishes to take away evils and is unable. So that's option number one. That's limiting God's power, God's omnipotence. Or he is able and he is unwilling, criticizing God's benevolence. Or he is neither willing nor able, taking away both qualities there. Or he is both willing and able. So he could be willing or able, but he isn't. And that seems to really, like all of those things lead to a problem, basically. The logical problem from Mackey then is pointing out the inconsistency, the logical inconsistency with the maintenance of three ideas. The idea is that we've got to reject one to have a consistent conception of God. Evil exists, that seems pretty hard to deny, based on natural and moral evil. We then have God's divine attributes, omnipotence, benevolence. It seems like we can have two of any of these three options, but not all three. Any one we reject is going to be a problem for God's definition. And it seems like it can't be evil that goes. And so we need to directly criticize God. The first logical problem was trying to point out an inconsistency, trying to really show that God's definition, our concept of God, is not consistent. The evidential problem is more focused on the existence of God. The evidential problem is using induction. It's sort of the other side of the fork. You know, if you think about sort of, we're now on the empirical side, the probability side. The idea is just that given the evil in the world, we can have two competing hypotheses. A, an all-loving, all-powerful God exists. Or B, God does not exist. Given the evil in the world, which one is more plausible? Now, given the vast extent of suffering, the amount of suffering, given the depth of suffering and the intensity of suffering, the no end to suffering and evil in the world, given all of these things, which seems more probable? Well, look at the evil, you can make your own judgment, but I think it's pretty plausible that an all-perfect, all-loving God wouldn't let these things happen. And so it doesn't seem like God exists, given the evidential problem. Understand how those two things are different, understand how they can work in different ways. Now, to explain the problem of evil, we have Theodicies. The first theodicy we'll look at, not part of the spec, so not essential. If the exam's in a few days, you're watching this, you're like, oh man, I really don't know this, don't worry. This is not on the spec, so you'll never get like a 5 or a 12 mark question on this. I'm adding it in to help you with essays. So, Augustine's theodicy. Augustine is appealing to revealed theology. He's appealing to the Bible. The idea is just that, given God's perfect nature, God could not have created evil. So the world was not created evil, but the world was created with Adam and Eve, who were free. Adam and Eve were free beings. The idea is just that, given Adam and Eve had free choice, and they made a bad choice, they went against God, they ate from the tree of knowledge, what that meant is evil was then brought into the world. Okay? So they sinned, and evil was then brought into the world because there were consequences of disobeying God. What this means is, because of God's nature, a perfect nature, God couldn't have created evil, so evil doesn't actually exist in the world as a thing. It's just that in the same way that darkness isn't really a thing in the world, it's just the deprivation of light, evil is exactly the same. Evil isn't a thing which exists, it's just the deprivation of goodness that was caused by the original sin. That's Augustine's theodicy. Now, I mentioned this in regards to an essay, so possible responses include doubting the historical grounds for Genesis and the Genesis story, doubting the scientific grounds that God created the universe, or just skepticism about whether revealed theology can ever act as good proof for, in philosophy. Theology, it may work, but in philosophy it may not sit well with your philosophical intuitions that we can really do philosophy in this way and we can really just appeal to the Bible. So that's another way in which you can criticise Augustine's theodicy. It also is just quite unsatisfying, the idea that the mistake of two individuals has caused, and we can appeal maybe to the evidential problem here, the incredible amount of evil and suffering in the world. That doesn't really seem like a plausible explanation. But that's the first theodicy that you need and some responses. Next, a better theodicy, Plantinga's free will defence. Now, this works by outlining 4 possible worlds. And the working parts to these 4 possible worlds are free beings and evil. So there are 4 possible worlds given these 2 variables. We can have no free beings and no evil. But no free beings and no evil just doesn't quite seem satisfying, because freedom seems like this real virtue, this real good thing. It seems like we're free. It seems like there's evil. And if it were the case that, the world had no evil but no free beings, we'd just sort of be robots in a pleasant video game. And that doesn't really seem like the best possible world that God would have chosen, given God's attributes. The other possible world would be no free beings and evil. But again, that seems like the worst of both worlds, because we are punished for things that aren't even our fault through evil. So God seemingly wouldn't choose that one. So it seems like God would choose a world with freedom. Now, God can't choose a world, or not can't, but it seems like God wouldn't choose a world where we have freedom and no evil. That doesn't really seem possible, because part of what it means to say freedom is to have the ability to do otherwise, to do good, to do something in accordance with God's will, and things against God's will. So things that are evil and that cause suffering in the world. We must make mistakes and do bad things, because that's just part of what it means to be free. And so we can't really have the option of free beings and no evil. So the best possible world is one with free beings and evil. God chose the higher good of libertarian free will, but in so doing, we have evil that's caused by that freedom. But that's the option that God chose. That's the free will defense. Flesh out those points for like a 5 or a 12 mark question. Now, the problem with this, although it doesn't require such a high burden on like revealed theology that doesn't quite seem as plausible, it does require proof of free will. It assumes that free will exists and that free will is a good. Both of those assumptions we can doubt, and both those assumptions really require proof for it to be a good argument. So Plantinga needs to explain that we do in fact have free will, because at present it's just an assumption that we do. And then he needs to show in some way that free will is a better good than the extent of evil in the world. I mean, some people might choose to not to be free in order to alleviate the vast evil that they are suffering. So 2 assumptions of Plantinga's argument there that you can pick out as criticisms if you need to, which you probably should if you get an essay. Okay, final Theodicy is from Hick, and this is about soul making. Part of this is Aristotelian, so if you're familiar with Aristotle's ethics, then part of this will be familiar. The idea is just that genuine virtue comes from genuine suffering and genuine hardship. In order to develop courage, strength, charity, empathy, we require experience of suffering, of war, of famine, of impoverishment, of people who are worse than us. All of these things lead to our souls developing genuine virtues. If we don't have those things, people who have not lived with any suffering, they don't quite seem to have a very refined, virtuous character. That seems to be a problem, and so what Hick is arguing God is doing, he can maintain all of these 3, because evil can exist. God allowed evil to exist, given his benevolence and omnipotence, because he wants humanity to be as good and developed and virtuous as possible. And so that's Hick's theodicy. The idea is just that, yes, evil does exist. Evil exists for a purpose, to make us better. This is a higher good, and it outweighs the evil in the world. That's the idea. Now, of course, this also rests on some assumptions. So if you're going to criticize this, I'll point out a few of them. This list is not exhaustive. First of all, it assumes we have souls and that we're going somewhere and that there's, some purpose, some sort of metaphysical content that we're not familiar with in the physical world. So it's true that I can develop my character and I can be a better person, but there's an additional assumption that Hick is making, that there's a soul involved in that equation. So just be aware of that. Okay. The next idea is that the assumption is that soul making is better than evil in the world. We can question that assumption as well. And then the other problem is, what about all the times in which we have hardship without the genuine improvement? So children who, God forbid, die early of diseases, there's no time for their soul to sufficiently develop to justify the hardship and the suffering that they've been through. And so that doesn't quite seem to add up. And the big problem that we'll finish today with is about natural evil. So even if we assume free will and souls exist and that we have them, animals, things in the natural world do not seem to have them in the same way. They don't seem to have moral autonomy, they don't seem to have souls. And so the suffering that they endure, that animals endure, is like a massive problem. It's a greater extent to humans, because at least humans can like do things in order to fulfill and satisfy our pleasures. Some very intelligent animals might be able to do as well, but not most animals. Most animals are just trying to avoid suffering. Alex O'Connor talks about this quite a lot. That the whole of the animal kingdom is like completely brutal when everything is done in the avoidance of suffering, and like every possible fate of an animal is suffering. And it just doesn't seem very plausible that God exists and this type of natural evil exists. And even if we grant the two Theodicies, or the three even Theodicies that we've talked about, still doesn't seem to work for natural evil. So the evidential problem and the natural problem seem very big problems in this unit. That's one place you could go in an essay. Now, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have, please give it a like and share it with someone who will also benefit in the same way. Thank you for watching.